Hidden behind razor wire and fog on California's remote north coast lies a concrete labyrinth few outsiders have ever seen. In Pelican Bay State Prison's Security Housing Unit, known as the SHU, men are locked alone for nearly every hour of every day. This is where California isolated thousands under one of the harshest solitary confinement regimes in the United States. Today, we pull back the steel door on the SHU to reveal its history, its human cost, and the fight to end it. When Pelican Bay State Prison opened in 1989 near Crescent City, California, it was designed to embody a new era of control over the state's most disruptive inmates. Built on 275 acres of redwood clear-cut land just a few miles from the Oregon border, it cost nearly $277 million, an unprecedented sum at the time. Officials touted it as a state-of-the-art facility to handle gang leaders, escape risks, and violent offenders who, in their view, had outgrown the old penitentiaries. The centerpiece of that plan was the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, a sprawling X-shaped complex of windowless concrete pods. Each pod holds 8 cells facing a small enclosed day room. There are no bars, only solid gray doors with perforated steel grills for food trays and communication. Lights stay on 24 hours a day. Inside, the cells measure roughly 8 by 10 feet, just large enough for a steel bunk, a combination sink toilet, and a narrow writing desk poured from concrete. Prisoners are allowed out for exercise perhaps 90 minutes a day, but only into what critics call dog run yards. Bare concrete pens the size of a single-car garage, open to the sky yet surrounded by 20-foot walls. From the beginning, human rights groups sounded the alarm. In 1990, the ACLU and local attorneys documented how men in the SHU went years without fresh air beyond those exercise cages, natural light, phone calls, or educational programs. Visits took place through thick glass. Even medical and mental health care occurred cell front. This was not simply segregation for a few weeks after a fight. For many, it became a sentence of years, or decades, of near-total isolation. California prison officials defended the model as necessary to control prison gangs. By concentrating alleged gang leaders in one place, they said, violence in the general population would drop. But advocates argued the SHU didn't just isolate dangerous men. It created a system of indefinite solitary confinement based on secret evidence, with no clear way out. That tension would define Pelican Bay's reputation for the next quarter century. Step inside one of Pelican Bay's SHU cells, and the first thing you notice is the silence. 8 feet by 10, poured concrete walls, no window to the outside world. The fluorescent light hums overhead, sometimes never dimmed. A heavy steel door with a perforated slot seals you from the corridor. Inside are only a concrete bunk, a thin mattress, a stainless steel sink toilet combo, and a small shelf bolted to the wall. This is home for up to 22.5 hours a day. Meals arrive through the slot, so do medications, legal papers, and occasional mail. The only face you may see is a correctional officer's gloved hand. Inmates speak of time blurring, day and night indistinguishable, and sensory deprivation taking a toll, an experience confirmed by clinical psychologists who have studied long-term solitary confinement. Exercise happens in what prisoners call the dog run, a roofed concrete pen slightly larger than the cell itself, ringed by high walls and mesh overhead, so the sky appears as a narrow strip. Some men go years without touching grass or seeing a tree. Phone calls, classes, religious services, and contact visits are rare or non-existent. Even family visits take place through thick glass on a closed-circuit phone, often after hours of travel for loved ones. Former SHU prisoner Todd Ashker, a lead plaintiff in the later lawsuits, once described it as living in a small concrete box with no meaningful human contact for decades. The SHU was not meant only for disciplinary segregation. California built an entire classification system known as gang validation. Under Department of Corrections rules in the 1990s and 2000s, an inmate could be validated as a member or associate of a prison gang based on a 3-point system: possession of artwork with certain symbols, being named by another prisoner, or having a confidential informant's note in a file. No criminal conviction was required. Once validated, a prisoner was shipped to Pelican Bay's SHU for an indeterminate term. Release back to general population often depended on debriefing, renouncing gang ties, and providing information about others. Critics called it a coercive snitch system. Men who refused to debrief out of fear of retaliation, or out of principle, remained in the SHU for years or even decades. In 2011, the California Office of the Inspector General confirmed that some prisoners had been isolated 20 years or more under validation, even without disciplinary infractions. This system attracted widespread criticism from legal scholars, journalists, and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, who warned that prolonged solitary confinement beyond 15 days can amount to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment under international law. By the late 2000s, a movement began to coalesce around the men inside Pelican Bay's SHU. Civil rights attorneys from the Center for Constitutional Rights, CCR, filed class action suits arguing that California's practice of indefinite solitary confinement violated the Eighth Amendment. Meanwhile, families of prisoners formed support networks, traveling long distances to Sacramento and Crescent City for vigils, press conferences, and legislative hearings. In July 2011, more than 6,000 California prisoners launched a coordinated hunger strike, sparked by leaders in Pelican Bay's SHU. They issued 5 core demands, calling for an end to group punishments, a more meaningful gang validation process, adequate food, and expanded educational and phone access. The strike drew national headlines, and when it resumed in 2013, it grew to 29,000 participants across the state, one of the largest prison hunger strikes in U.S. history. Dozens of prisoners were hospitalized. Billy Guerrero Cell, a 32-year-old SHU inmate, died during the 2013 protest after repeated medical requests. His death became a rallying point for reformers. These actions, combined with litigation such as Ashker versus Governor of California, ultimately led to a landmark 2015 settlement. California agreed to end indefinite solitary confinement for most prisoners and overhaul its gang validation system, transferring thousands out of the SHU. Yet for many survivors, the psychological scars of long-term isolation remain. Psychologists who have studied Pelican Bay's SHU consistently describe a pattern of SHU syndrome: anxiety, depression, hypersensitivity to sound, trouble with concentration and memory, even hallucinations. Dr. Craig Haney of UC Santa Cruz interviewed dozens of SHU prisoners and found many exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Prisoners spoke of pacing endlessly, talking to themselves, or staring at the ceiling for hours. One former SHU resident told the Los Angeles Times that after 15 years in isolation, "My ability to think in a straight line is gone." These effects are not just temporary. People released from long-term solitary often report ongoing difficulty with social interactions and impulse control, making re-entry harder and increasing recidivism risk. The United Nations Mandela Rules now state that solitary beyond 15 consecutive days should be prohibited because of the mental health harm. Yet California, until the 2015 settlement, routinely held men in the SHU for decades. Adopted unanimously by the UN General Assembly in 2015, the Mandela Rules set a global baseline for humane treatment of prisoners. They define solitary confinement as confinement of 22 hours or more a day without meaningful human contact, and state that prolonged solitary beyond 15 days may amount to torture. The rules also emphasize due process in classification and the need for medical and mental health care equivalent to that available in the community. In California at the time, Pelican Bay's SHU regime stood in stark contrast. Many prisoners spent 23 hours a day in their cells, with no contact visits, limited access to reading materials, and virtually no rehabilitative programming. Medical care was typically cell front. Confidential gang validation evidence was often withheld from inmates, making it difficult to challenge. The gap between international standards and state practice became a powerful talking point for advocacy groups pressing lawmakers and courts to act. For every man in the SHU, there is a mother, spouse, or child traveling hundreds of miles to see him. Pelican Bay sits at the far northern tip of California, a full day's drive from Los Angeles or the Bay Area. Visits are non-contact, through thick glass on a closed-circuit phone. Families often spend more time on the road than in the visiting booth. Grassroots groups like California Families to Abolish Solitary Confinement organized bus caravans, letter-writing campaigns, and vigils outside the prison gates. They held up photos of their sons and brothers at rallies in Sacramento. For many families, the isolation imposed on their loved ones also extended to them, creating a second layer of punishment. These public displays of solidarity helped bring the hidden world of the SHU into public view and laid the groundwork for the hunger strikes and lawsuits that followed. The legal battle over Pelican Bay's SHU culminated in Ashker vs. Governor of California, filed in 2012 by the Center for Constitutional Rights and a team of California attorneys. The suit argued that long-term solitary confinement violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment and the 14th Amendment's due process protections. Depositions, expert reports, and tours of the SHU by legislators created a record of conditions previously hidden from public scrutiny. As the hunger strikes gained momentum in 2013, state lawmakers held hearings where former SHU prisoners, family members, and mental health experts testified. News cameras captured images of lawmakers sitting beneath the California state seal, while relatives held up pictures of their incarcerated loved ones. This combination of litigation, public pressure, and media exposure set the stage for the 2015 settlement. By late that year, California began transferring hundreds of men out of the SHU and overhauling its gang validation procedures, an unprecedented shift in U.S. prison policy. When the Ashker settlement took effect in 2015, more than 1,500 prisoners who had spent years in Pelican Bay's SHU were reviewed for transfer to general population units or to newly created high-security yards. California Department of Corrections officials dismantled the old gang validation system that had automatically funneled inmates into indefinite isolation. Instead, placement in a restricted custody general population, RCGP unit, or other high-security housing was tied to documented misconduct, not just association. For some men, the change was dramatic. They walked onto open yards for the first time in decades, seeing grass, sunlight, and large groups of other people. Others moved into step-down programs where they could gradually regain privileges such as phone calls and contact visits. But the transition was not smooth. Many prisoners carried deep psychological scars, and some expressed fear about being placed back among others after so long alone. The settlement marked a turning point, but it did not erase the trauma. During the hunger strikes and litigation, mainstream outlets such as CBS News, NPR, and the New York Times began running in-depth reports on Pelican Bay's SHU. Journalists were granted rare tours of the facility, photographing the concrete exercise pens and windowless cells. These images reached audiences far beyond California, sparking debate about solitary confinement across the United States. Documentaries, podcasts, and academic studies followed. Former SHU prisoners like Todd Ashker and Arturo Castellanos wrote op-eds or gave interviews from behind bars. Advocacy groups used social media to circulate handwritten statements from inside the SHU. What had once been an invisible system of extreme isolation became a national story about human rights, mass incarceration, and state power. Correctional officers working in Pelican Bay's SHU be their own stories. Many described the unit as a necessary tool to control deadly prison gangs like the Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, and Nuestra Familia. They pointed to statistics showing reductions in assaults and homicides after the SHU opened. Some officers said the step-down reforms made their jobs more dangerous by placing high-risk inmates back in general population. Yet others, especially mental health staff, acknowledged the toll that long-term isolation takes on both prisoners and employees. Constant exposure to a tense, silent environment can lead to burnout, cynicism, and high turnover. A few retired officers have publicly supported alternatives to indefinite solitary, arguing that genuine rehabilitation requires more than concrete and steel. This tension between security and humanity remains at the heart of debates over prison policy. The reforms sparked by Pelican Bay's SHU reverberated far beyond California. Other states, from New York to Colorado, reviewed their use of long-term solitary confinement. Lawsuits citing the Ashker case have challenged similar practices elsewhere. In 2022, California legislators introduced bills to codify limits on solitary in all state prisons and county jails, citing the Mandela rules as a benchmark. Advocates stress that progress is fragile. Prison systems can revert to old habits, and restrictive housing under new names may replicate SHU conditions. But the struggle at Pelican Bay showed that coordinated action by prisoners, families, lawyers, and journalists can force change in even the most entrenched institutions. The SHU, once California's proudest control unit, has become a cautionary tale about the costs of extreme isolation. Pelican Bay's security housing unit was built to be hidden, but its story has emerged as a defining chapter in the history of U.S. incarceration. From decades of near-total isolation to the largest hunger strikes in California prison history, the SHU exposed how secrecy and security can collide with basic human rights. The reforms achieved so far are the result of people inside and outside refusing to look away. As debates over solitary confinement continue nationwide, the lessons of Pelican Bay echo. Transparency matters, due process matters, and no one should disappear behind a steel door without a path back to human contact. Viewers are left to ask, what kind of justice system do we want? And at what cost?